I greet you in the name of Yeshua Messiah, our Lord Jesus Christ. It's Ivan, and it is the 11th of August. It's just before 6 o'clock in the evening in South Africa. I wanted to get this recording done a little earlier today, and today was our Sabbath day on the calendar that I believe is the only correct calendar. And but I decided to spend a bit of time just studying some of the feasts, so I'm getting into the sacrifices and things like that. I started it a little while ago, and I decided that I may need to just talk about it a little bit during this video, so I spent some time going into it, and I soon realized that there was such a tremendous amount of detail there that I might have to keep it for a separate video. I'm going to try and keep this video to about 40 minutes. As Chantal said to me, these long videos, people are reluctant to watch the whole video or to get into the video when it's particularly long. So I'm going to do my best to get my point across in about 40 minutes. And if I run out of time, I'll leave whatever I haven't covered for maybe another video or so. I shared in the forum yesterday that I was going to record this video and that I was going to be talking about this proposed calendar that I put across, and the proposed timing for what I believe will be our escape date. So that's where I really just want to start off. First of all, this is based on a calendar that I believe is the true calendar. It is, as far as I'm aware, it's the only calendar that's based on the stars and the sun and the moon. Unlike the Hebrew calendar, and the Hebrew calendar I will show you does not include the stars in its determining of the beginning of its year, and I'll get into that a little bit. I covered this in great detail in my previous videos. In particular, a video that I called the calendars why. So in this video here, which was quite a lengthy video, I went into a tremendous amount of detail about how I came to this particular calendar that I'm proposing, and I've called it the YHWH calendar, but we can call it the Sun, Moon and Stars calendar as well. I just want to stress at this point that this is not an Enoch calendar. I particularly dislike the name Enoch calendar because Enoch did not give us a calendar. Enoch, in the book of Enoch, the movement of the sun and the moon is described. A calendar is not described. I've went into a great amount of detail on Enoch's luminaries in this video here, part 1, and this video, part 2, where I describe my understanding of what Enoch is really saying with regards to the luminaries and how he describes the sun, the movements through the gates, and what the meaning of the real gates are and what the meaning of the windows are in that particular chapter on the luminaries. And then I also go into the moon, and I show in this video that there's at least a 5-day difference between the cycle of the sun and the cycle of the moon, and probably a 35-day difference if one begins the year where it's supposed to begin. And so I'm not going to get into too much detail on this, but I just want to make it very clear that the calendar that I call this based on the sun, moon and stars is not the Enoch calendar. There are many calendars out there that use the name Enoch calendar or Enoch Zendok priest, high priest calendar, and all sorts of names, and none of them are correct. All of them are based on the movement of the sun only. They do not include the moon and the stars. So as far as I'm concerned, none of them are correct. Yes, there are some of these Enoch calendars that position the phases of the moon throughout their calendar, but their full moons are not in the middle of the month where I believe they should be on God's true calendar, and the cycles are determined based on the sun's movements. So I'm very clear in my mind. The Enoch calendar is incorrect, and we could only use these descriptions to understand the movements of the sun and the star, not to base our calendar on it, because the calendar wasn't described here. In fact, we just need to be cautious about the book of Enoch as well. I don't regard it as a as an inspired text, an inspired scripture. And I believe that it was written far more recently than Enoch's time for a start, and may even be written by more than one person. And it was all lumped together under the name Enoch's, under these two books. I think there's two parts to the book. There was a video put out on this particular channel here, Truth Channel, and this was done in 2018, where this guy describes how the false Enoch calendar versus Yahuwah's calendar, and he goes into a fair amount of detail on why he believes that the book of Enoch and the description of the lunaries are not a true calendar. I agree with much of what he describes in this video. It is quite a long video as well. It's 1 hour 50 minutes. There are a few things that I don't agree with regards to what he has to say in this video. I don't believe he understands when the true beginning of the year is, and he also doesn't understand that the crescent moon is not the first day of the month. The crescent moon is the first day of the working week, but the first day of the working week is not the first day of the month. The new moon day is the first day of the month. And he also, in this video, you'll see I don't agree where he describes the Sabbaths as being governed by the sun, and he mentions there, and he shows scripture where it refers to the Sabbath day, and he therefore believes that the Sabbath is governed by the sun. I disagree with that. The Sabbath is clearly one of the feasts, and I'm going to get into the feasts a little bit. That's the main purpose of this video, is to not only look at the calendar and the timing, what I believe to be the feast days, but I want to have a look at how it relates to God's feasts and why it's important that we shouldn't discard the feasts. So the Sabbath is clearly one of the feast days, and all of the feast days are governed by the timing of the moon phases. So the day, as far as I'm concerned, I'm just wondering, he makes a statement in here which I agree with. I'll see if I can just find it in this video. There was a particular point. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Let's see if I can find where he summarized. Okay, he goes into a fair amount of detail. I don't know. Okay. I don't think I'm going to find it here in a short space of time. But basically summarized where the sun governs the day, the moon governs the month, and the stars govern the year. I agree with that. But the Enoch calendar doesn't include the moon and the stars, and therefore is incorrect. And I'm totally convinced that the Enoch calendar is right. So I'd prefer to refer to this calendar that I'm proposing as the sun, moon, and stars calendar. It is the only one that includes the stars in the determining of the year. The Hebrew calendar does not use the stars to determine the year. I'm just going to get into that a little bit. I covered it in great detail in this video, but I'll just recap a little bit on that. If we have a look at the Hebrew calendar, and I've been able to reconstruct the calculation of the Hebrew calendar. It is also the calculation for the calendar that's proposed by the guys at World's Last Chance on the website. I covered that in my previous video. And I can tell you categorically that the Hebrew calendar bases their dates on the sun, the position of the sun, and the position of the moon, and the equinox. And the equinox is determined by the position of the sun. So there is nothing in the Hebrew calendar or the calendar of World's Last Chance that includes the stars. Nothing. And that is wrong. And the reason why I say that is wrong is because of Genesis 1:14. If we go to Genesis 1:14, God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs." Let them, okay, all the lights, not just them, let them be for signs and for seasons. That's moedim, in other words, appointed times, and for days and for years. So we must determine our days and years and our appointed times using all of the lights, the stars, the sun, and the moon. Okay, because it goes on to say that the lights were put into the firmament, and they're comprised of a greater light and a lesser light and the stars. So there's no doubt in my mind that any calendar that does not include the stars, the sun, and the moon is inherently incorrect and does not meet the requirements, does not comply with Scripture. And therefore, that's why I say the Hebrew calendar does not comply with Scripture. They also begin their month on the crescent moon as the first day. I believe that is incorrect. World's Last Chance begins their month on such that the crescent moon is the first day of the working week, which I believe is correct. So there's a few differences between World's Last Chance and the Hebrew calendar, but they fundamentally both aim to have the Passover as close as possible to the equinox, as opposed to what I'm proposing, where the Passover must be when the sun is in Aries. So in my case, this is exactly the same calculation as the Hebrew calendar and the World's Last Chance, with the only exception being the target. In this calendar, we don't aim to keep the Passover at the equinox. We aim to make sure that the Passover happens such that the sun is in Aries. And I'll go into some detail, and you'll see that this picture, this to me makes a lot of sense. This results in a calendar that's now based on the sun, the position of the sun, the position of the moon, and we've got the stars. So I am yet to find another calendar that incorporates the entire year, determining the beginning of the year, determining the months, determining the days of the month, and determining when it's a long year or a short year. There's two types of year. You've got a 13-month year and you get a 12-month year. And this calendar that I'm proposing, the Sun, Moon, and Stars calendar, is based entirely on letting the position of the Sun, Moon, and Stars to determine all of those factors. Determines exactly when the months start, when the year starts, when the months occur, how long they are, whether they're 29 days or whether they're 30 days, and then, of course, whether the year is a 12-month year or a 13-month year. So I spent a fair amount of time getting into this, into detail on this calculation and this calendar in my previous video, so I don't want to spend too much time on it here. So this is what it really looks like. The calculations are in the background there, and then we just present the calendar in this format, which is a little bit easier to read. Okay, so getting to my forecast, this is what I wanted to spend most of my time on here. And so I just needed to recap a little bit on why I believe this calendar is the correct one. It is a month. It does start a month later than the Hebrew calendar, where the Hebrew calendar started in March, I think the 26th. World's Last Chance started March 25th. I believe the correct start would have been 24th of April, based on the calculation of the position of the sun, moon, and stars, such that the sun is in Aries for the first month. Okay, so when we based on this calendar, we determined some time ago, going back about 6 months ago, we came to the understanding of how to correctly, when the Feast of First Fruits was, how to determine when the Feast of Weeks is, and then we also came to understand that there was another feast called the Feast of New Wine, which we came to understand was the true Pentecost, and then I believe that there's also a Feast of New Oil, which occurs together with trumpets. Okay, and so the thing that I want to highlight here is that I believe that God's redemption plan is still in the feasts. We need to not move away from the feasts. Yes, the Feast of Weeks has come and gone. On the Hebrew calendar, the Feast of New Wine has come and gone, the 9th of Av, and now there's a tendency to want to maybe disregard the feasts in terms of what God's plan is in His or Yahweh's redemption plan is, and I think that's wrong. In this calendar, because we are a month behind the Hebrew calendar, the Feast of New Wine is still coming up. And that's why I believe that we will still escape on the Feast of New Wine, which is the Pentecost. And I want to just spend a little bit of time on that. That's coming up on the 28th of August. I proposed this some time ago. This was before we had the Tish B'Av and the Tu B'Av, all those suggestions that as possible escape days, they've all come and gone. I know we're looking now at the possibility of the 21st of August or thereabouts, largely because of the 3-year warning which occurred in 2017 on the 21st of August was the Great American Eclipse, and for that reason we believe that this is a high watch date as well. You can see how close it is to the date that I'm proposing, and I believe it is a valid marker that eclipse is valid, but that it's a 7-day warning. So in other words, it comes up on the 21st, and I believe that we will have the escape around the 28th and 29th of August. And I'll get into these two dates just now. I'll explain why I suggest those two dates, and it's all related to a prophecy or a vision that we've been looking at for some time with regards to a little Swedish boy, and I'll get into that a bit later. Just now, just want to recap where we were. We determined that a Feast of First Fruits was the day after the Sabbath, the day they put the sickle to the corn. In other words, the day that they started harvesting. So this is the day they would not have started harvesting during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and we cannot have a feast within a feast situation. So without going into too much detail there, we are convinced that the Feast of First Fruits, the correct day to start it, is the 23rd of the first month, and this date meets the requirements on all the scriptures in terms of what it gives us. Unfortunately, the scriptures do not give us an exact day. Unlike Passover, which is given to us as the 14th day of the first month, and unleavened bread, exact days are given. There are two feasts that are not given to us as exact days. This Feast of First Fruits is given to us, but not as an exact day. We have to determine it from an understanding of Scripture. The Feast of Weeks is also not given to us an exact day. We are given it as a count. And so we've come to the conclusion that the Feast of First Fruits must be on this day. And then the Feast of Weeks, we are told, we are to count of 7 Sabbaths, and the day after the 7th Sabbath is the Feast of Weeks. And then in Leviticus 23, there's also the mention of counting 50 days. And I know that we've been backwards to and fro with regards to how we deal with that 50 days. But the truth of the matter is, in Deuteronomy, there is no mention of the extra 50 days, where it speaks about the Feast of Weeks in Deuteronomy 16. And also in Numbers 28, it mentions nothing about the extra 50 days. So I'm not convinced that there's an extra 50 days. It's a 50-day count within the 7 weeks that we need to count off. So from first fruits, we would count off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Sabbaths, and the day after the 7th Sabbath would be the Feast of Weeks. And then if we want, then it also tells us to count 50 days, and if we count the number of days excluding these transition days, which are outside of the weekdays, and New Moon Day, which is outside of the weekday, if we count the weekdays plus 1, this will be the 50th weekday. And I believe that is the correct way to determine the Feast of Weeks, and that's why we've got it plugged in on this case It'll always be on the 16th day of the third month. You will recall that we discovered that Jesus' birthday was on the 15th day of the third month. I'm not going to go into detail on that, but just to recap very briefly, it was all about understanding the 17th of June in 2 BC, when the conjunction between Jupiter and Venus occurred on that day, marking the birth, making up the Bethlehem star, and we then equated that to the Hebrew calendar in that time as being equal to the 17th of June 2 BC was equal to the 15th day of the third month. In my previous video, I also mentioned that we know that the Hebrew calendar in that particular year, or that time, at the time of Jesus' birth, was in line with the true count as to when you should start a year. Okay, I mentioned that in my previous video. I will cover it very briefly just now. But what we have, we've determined that this was Jesus' birthday on the 15th day of the third month, the day before the Feast of Weeks. Now, we also understood that Pentecost was at the time of new wine. Now, we know that the scriptures do not mention exactly how to count to the Feast of New Wine and or how to count to the Feast of New Oil. In fact, very little is actually said in those scriptures. And I will get into that a little bit detail, but while I'm on this calendar here, I believe that there are two other Feast of Weeks that we need to consider. The one is Feast of Weeks and New Wine, which is Pentecost, and the other one is Feast of Weeks, New Oil. And that we apply exactly the same rules that we use to determine when the Feast of Weeks is. We apply the same rules to determine when the Feast of New Wine is, and then again the same rules to determine when the Feast of New Oil is. And I haven't marked it on here because it coincides usually with the Feast of Trumpets. Okay, so if we apply that 7-week and 50-day rule to counting from the Feast of Weeks New Grain, this is Feast of Weeks New Grain, then we would apply 7 Sabbaths. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the day after that is the Feast of New Wine. And then the 50-day count would be exactly the same. If you count off the weekdays from Feast of Weeks New Grain, you count off 50 days, you would get to the same day, the 28th of August on this calendar. The 9th of Av in every single year will be the Feast of New Wine. I believe this also coincides with what happened with regards to the worshipping of the golden calf. I will recap a little bit of the Noah story and how it lines up with all of these Feast of Weeks and of New Grain and the Feast of Weeks of New Wine shortly. But let me just complete the final feast that we should be looking at is another 7-week count and 50-day count to the Feast of New Wine, which falls exactly on trumpets. So from there we count of 7 Sabbaths again. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the next day, okay, this is, you don't count this is a transition day, okay. So some years there will be an extra day in the 6th month, and some years there will only be one day. There won't be 30 days it just depends on the position of the sun, moon and stars. That's why the Feast of Trumpets is always the day that nobody knows, because you have to wait until you get to this point to see whether it's going to be a long month or whether it's going to be a 29-day month or a 30-day month. And so that's whenever that occurs, then what it brings us to is that Feast of New Oil coincides with the Feast of Trumpets and the beginning of the 7th month. And we've applied the same rules to determining all 3 of the Feast of Weeks. The Feast of Weeks of New Grain, Feast of Weeks of New Wine, and Feast of Weeks of New Oil. And we'll see just now in the scriptures that new wine and new oil was definitely a big factor in the scriptures, although it was never really dated in terms of or flagged as a specific feast day for some other reason, but I believe they should be there. We also know that the feast of at least Pentecost has been associated where they were accused of being drunk on new wine. So we know that the feast of new wine had something to do with Pentecost as well. And I believe that I know some people count 50 days from this feast where they just count a straightforward normal 50 days, and then they get to a date somewhere around, I think it's the 25th or the 25th of August, somewhere around there. I can't remember the exact date. I don't agree. I believe we have to apply the same rules to each of the feasts, and you can see how neatly it fits in to the times that we move exactly from each one has its slot, and without manipulation, we end up exactly on the Feast of Trumpets. And I believe that is the correct way to determine when they're going to be. So, just coming to the significance of the Feast of New Wine, we need to go back and look a little bit at the Moses story, Exodus story, I should say. In other words, we know that Passover, unleavened bread, were clearly linked to the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. We know that they had to slaughter the lamb, the Passover lamb, paint the blood of the lamb on the doorposts, and then the angel of death, they were protected by the blood of the lamb from the angel of death. And then this was when they departed they left on the evening of the 15th day, just after the Sabbath had completed. Remember, a Sabbath is only during the day, from sunrise to sunset. So, and it would be full moon, so they would have been able to walk it under the full moon. They started leaving Egypt, and it took them a couple of days. And I'm not going to get too much into that story, but we know that it took them, by the second month, by the 15th day, there's the whole story of where they received the manna and also the quail. That all happened a month later. So at the middle of the month, you can go read in the story. I haven't marked it up on this calendar, but that all occurred at the 15th day of the second month. Then when we read on, we get to Exodus 19. We read that the Israelites, that they arrived on the 16th day of the third month. Now, it's not written in the scriptures as the 16th day of the third month. We know it says the same day. So we know that it talks about them having departed from the camp of rest, and then they which points to the Sabbath day, and then they arrived in Mount Sinai on the 16th day of the third month, which would have been exactly on the Feast of Weeks. And that's where I want to pick up on the story here. So there's the arrival date at Mount Sinai, and we know that Moses then went up into the mountain, and Yahuwah spoke to him, and he said to him, "Go and tell the people to be ready today, tomorrow, the third day, I'm going to appear on Mount Sinai." And that would have been the 18th day of the third month. And I believe that these 3 days are very significant in these 3 days. And I believe there's a type and shadow in it over here that's going to point us to what's going to happen here. Just we've got a shift from Feast of Weeks to Feast of New Wine. Now, just very briefly, we know that after that Moses received the law. During this time, he received the law. There was they entered into the covenant. It was sealed. There was 73 plus Moses went up for a meal, and there was 6 days of smoke on the mountain. And then, after all of those things happened, we're not given exact dates, but we can, by interpolation, we can determine that Moses must have gone up again for these 40 days and 40 nights from either the 25th or the 26th of the third month. I believe it was the 25th, but some would say the 26th. I'm not going to argue too much about that. So we know that he went up for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, in the case of 40 days, 40 nights, we do count the new moon days and any transition days in that count. So that would be the pink line here, going through the end of the 40 days in this year, an equivalent of 40 days would bring us to the 25th of August, the 6th day of the 5th month. And if you left one day later, if it was the 26th, then it would be the 7th day of the 5th month. Okay? That would be the 40 days that Moses was in, went, and he received the pattern of the tabernacle during those 40 days. Just to complete the story, what happened was when he came back, it would have taken him a day or two to get back, and he arrived, I believe, it doesn't say that in the scripture, but I believe he arrived on the 9th of Av, on the very day when they were celebrating the Feast of New Wine and they were worshipping the golden calf. And we know that they were doing that on a feast because Aaron said tomorrow is a feast unto the Lord, and then they were singing and dancing, and they were everything is pointing to this having occurred on the Feast of New Wine. So we know after that there was the golden calf was destroyed, and we know that 3,000 were killed. And the story then goes on that Moses then started pleading with the Lord for forgiveness, to forgive the people, etc. And the scriptures don't tell us how long or how many days was spent doing that, but there was a fair amount of time going in and out the tent of prayer. It wasn't the tabernacle as such, but it was a tent where he prayed, and the cloud of the Lord and the Lord's glory was over that tent, and Moses spent some time there. I cannot say for certain if this is the correct number of days. I'm assuming it's about a week to 10 days, similar to the situation that we had over here. And then he went up for 40 days again, 40 days and 40 days and 40 nights, and this was to receive the second set of tablets, which he broke on this day when he came down. He smashed the tablets that were written, that the law was written onto, and he went back up for another 40 days to receive the second set. And I know there's some people believe that he came back down on the Day of Atonement. I believe that's Jewish tradition. I believe it's completely wrong. Moses did not come down on the Day of Atonement. He came down on the Day of Trumpets. This was the day, I believe, that Israel realized that they were now fully a nation and forgiven for their error at the Feast of New Wine, worshipping the golden calf. And this is why I believe the first of the 7th month for the Jews is such an important day, because this effectively was their day one as a nation. This is not necessarily day one from a year perspective, but it's become day one in their year from a legal perspective. So most of their contracts and all their agreements and that all focused around the first day of the 7th month. This is for them a turning cycle, and I believe it's because this is the day that they were now fully fledged the nation, and they had their law, and they were recognized as a nation in God's eyes at that time, for the first time. What happened here on the Feast of Trumpets was supposed to have happened here at the Feast of New Wine, but because they were worshipping the golden calf, this whole thing was delayed by the 50 days and the re-establishment of the covenant, and because the covenant was effectively broken when they worshipped the golden calf. Even though they'd entered into a covenant here, they'd broken it by the time they got here, and it had to be re-established during this next 50-day cycle. So if we just go back to, just want to see where, right, so we've got this, I just want to link this into what Alan has recently discovered with regards to this story, in that it's the sequence of the events. The sequence of the events is clearly a reverse order of what we're expecting to happen during these last days. So in other words, the 40 days that were at the end, this 40 days is more related to the 40 days of the Son of Man, and we've got a reverse order of events, and the events that happen here is more related to what will happen during the time of trumpets with regards to when the Lord turns back to dealing with the Jews. So I've looked at those scriptures. I fully agree with Alan 100% that these events clearly, when you read the descriptions and you read the texts that are described in these areas that are related to these events here, this is all the wording related to the time of the Jews. So even though it's a reverse order of the sequence of events, I do believe that the timing remains intact. In other words, we shouldn't be switching the timing around. Just the order of events is a reflection of the order of events that we can experience, but in reverse order. So if that, I hope that makes sense to you. So I want to so I've now linked the Exodus story to this timeline, and there's one other thing I've discovered in Ezekiel from chapter 1 to 11 is clearly relating to the time of the feast, time of seals, the time of the 7 seals, which we know is the next 6.5 to 7 years. And I've shared this idea before. I've put out a whole document, and I mentioned it in my previous videos as well, how these things seem to be related. There is in Ezekiel 1, there's a mention of a vision which is linked to the 5th day of the 4th month. There's a mention in the book of the 9th day of the 4th month where the leader of Israel at that time, which I believe is the type and shadow of what's to come, was captured and taken to Babylon. Zedekiah was his name. So Zedekiah was captured around this time on the 9th day of the 4th month. I was kind of hoping that something might happen, an event might happen along those sort of lines that would vindicate or at least confirm that we're on the right timeline. And that did not happen. So I've taken that out. I do believe, well, according to Ezekiel 3:16 and Ezekiel 4, there's a time of siege, a 40-day siege. This is when Ezekiel had to lie in his sand for 390 days and for 40 days. It's given the 390 days first and then the 40 days, but I believe it'll be reverse order again. And that'll be first the 40 days siege. It was during this time of 40 days that he watched Jerusalem. He had to make a model of Jerusalem under siege, and he watched the model being under siege during that 40 days. And if you read the text, the timing of that was around about this timing, the 1st or the 2nd of August, which, well, let me put it this way, the timing was around about the 12th to the 13th of the 4th month. And it's interesting that what we had this other event happening with the bombing in Beirut on the 15th of the 4th month, which was the 4th of August. So I don't know yet if that's all related to the beginning or the start of this 40-day siege period, but I do believe there is something happening there, and we'll see as time goes along. We know that the end of the 40 days, if it starts there, would be somewhere around the 9th of September, and I believe then starts the 390-day time when Ezekiel had lie in his side for 390 days, and I believe that if you read the context of it, of what happened and the reason for the 390 days, to me it clearly is pointing to the judgment of the nations. So I believe it will be the judgment of the nations having attacked Israel here, but yeah, it's up to interpretation. I do believe that this will be the beginning of the Third World War. Yeah, on the 11th of September. We'll start the 390-day Third World War, and that it'll last for 390 days, in other words, a year and a month going forward. I believe that if you read the context of the text in here, it kind of implies that Jesus will not be able to interfere, not be able to do anything to help his people during this 390 days. Basically, they're going to be on their own for this time. He's tied up, and that's what this whole thing was about, Ezekiel being tied up for those 390 days. That's just my interpretation. You may agree or disagree with that. In any case, let's get back to this time period and why. So I believe that we're looking at a possible escape on the 28th of August, which relates to the Feast of New Wine, which is the very day that they were worshipping the golden calf. There's an event that's happening right now as well. I just want to cover this quickly. They've been talking about rolling out of the vaccine, which in the news has been spoken about to come in around about September. I believe they'll start rolling out in end of August, beginning of September. And we know that this golden calf is related to vaccine. And the reason for that is the meaning. There's a meaning for this, the word vaccine. I think I've got it open here. Vaccine, which in Latin means cow. Okay, so vacca means cow in Latin, which is the base word for vaccine, for the English word vaccine. So we know that the vaccine is related to the golden calf that was worshipped at the time when Moses came down after his first 40 days. So I believe that there's something in this thing. This may be the day that they start the mass rollout of the golden calf, and but that we'll still see what happens there. We also know that in 2 Kings 25:8, this was when it was the 7th day of the 5th month is mentioned as the day when Jerusalem was attacked. So I believe that is related to an attack date. We know in Jeremiah the equivalent, it's almost verbatim, word for word, the same as 2 Kings 25. But Jeremiah 52:12, the only difference in the wording is in Jeremiah it says the 10th day of the 5th month, not the 7th day of the 5th month. So maybe it's related to a 3-day war or something like that. I don't know. I don't know why the difference is. All the other words are almost identical, except the one says 7th, and the other one says 10th day of the 5th month. And they're all around the 9th day of the 5th month, which we know on the true 5th month. Even though the Hebrew calendar says that day is come and gone, I believe in God's eyes it's still to come. And this is why we must avoid, we know that we were given a target date, or as Alan put it, an expiry date being the 9th of Av. At that time, we thought the expiry date was the 30th of July, because that's the day that the Hebrew calendar has got the 9th of Av on, or the 9th of the 5th month. But because they're 1 month too early, they've got the wrong date. And I believe this is the true date, and that our target, or our expiry date, is still intact. And our understanding of the feast of weeks of new wine and Pentecost, and the departure in or around this time for the escape of the bride is still intact, because this is the true calendar count based on the stars and the sun and the moon, not just the sun and the moon as the Hebrew calendar does. Okay, so I believe that we'll see an attack somewhere around this Wednesday, the 26th of August, maybe the 27th, I don't know, we'll see there. Now, I mentioned to you this 3 days. We know that this 3 days has got something to do with the 3 days here, where they arrived on the Feast of Weeks, and God said to Moses, Yahweh said to Moses, get your people ready today, tomorrow, and on the 3rd day, I will see them. They will see me on Mount Sinai. And we've got a similar situation here. I believe that we've got an event happening on this day, and this is where that vision of that young Swedish boy comes into play. And the reason, I know this, we must take some of these visions with a pinch of salt and be careful about them, and I do agree with that, but there's something about that vision that makes me believe that it's true. And the reason why I believe it's true and accurate is because the little boy described he described the firmament. When he described the people that were being taken up in the spirit, or whether in the body or out the body, we don't know, they were taken in some form through a beam of light. But if you go and read the script or listen to the translation, he clearly described the firmament. Now, I don't believe that that little boy understood anything about the firmament. In fact, most people in this world don't understand what the firmament is and don't even believe that there is a firmament. Well, I believe that there is a firmament because the Word of God says there's a firmament. I do believe the earth there is a barrier between the third heaven and the heavenly realm that we operate in. And that is the firmament. And that little boy described something that he didn't have any understanding of, which to me is a qualifier that what he saw and what he was told was correct. He did have his vision was related to a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that's exactly what we've got here on the side. I didn't manipulate this calendar to be like this. But yeah, we have a Friday, Saturday, Sunday situation. And is it at all possible that just like Moses went up on the Feast of Weeks here, and the Lord said, get ready today, tomorrow, and the third day, is it possible that we will have, as the little boy saw in the vision, a group going up to the mountain and being told, go and tell the people to get ready today, tomorrow, and the third day is the escape? I think that's, to me, this whole thing makes sense. There's one other thing that came up recently. In fact, two. There was a vision that was shared by Mike and Amish and Charles. I included it in my previous video, where somebody had received a timing, and it was pointing to exactly this time. I think it pointed to the 27th of August was the time that particular vision. You can go back and watch that video. It's right towards the end. I know it's a long video, but if you catch it right towards the end, you'll see I played a section of the video that was shared on Mike's channel, and it was received in July sometime, I think the 10th of July, and they were given a time. When you worked it out, it came to the 27th of August. Now recently in the forum, somebody shared a vision that, sorry, I can't remember who shared it on the forum, but this video was shared. You have 3 weeks to get your hearts and your houses in order. And this is very recent. This was received. My understanding is that this vision or this word that was received on the 9th of August of this year. And they were told 3 weeks. And it's interesting that during this word,
your nation.
Sorry, during this word, he was told that I gave you 7 weeks to prepare, 4 have passed, and there's 3 remaining. Now, I just found it very interesting that there was 7 weeks to prepare, and that's exactly the time period between the Feast of Weeks, 7 Sabbaths, okay, and he's given us 7 weeks to prepare. We were all expecting to go here. Now, we understood at the time that that the bride is the first fruits of new grain. And I believe that that is still correct. We just misunderstood. When is this celebrated? And we thought that because the bride is the first fruits of new grain, and this is the Feast of Weeks, new grain, that the escape should happen here. However, I believe what we misunderstood was that at each of these points, there's a celebration of a completion of a harvest and the beginning of the next harvest of the next crop. So in other words, at the Feast of First Fruits, it's the celebration of the completion it's the beginning. So this is the first fruits. This is the beginning of the harvest. So it's a celebration of the beginning of the harvest. Okay, and then during this time here, these 7 weeks, we've got the harvest of the barley and the old wheat, the wheat that was planted before the year began, in the previous year. So we've got that harvest of barley, and then when we get to the Feast of Weeks, it's a celebration of the completion of the barley and old wheat harvest and the beginning of the new wheat harvest. And that's where we've been going through this time now, is the beginning or the harvest of the new grain. And when we get to the Feast of New Wine, this is the celebration of the end of the harvest of new grain and the beginning of the harvest of the wine or the grapes. Okay, so and that we know that it seems to me that the church are the ones that have to go through the time of trouble, the 6.5 years. That's the winepress that's referred to in Revelations. So we at this point, it's a celebration of the completion of the new grain, which is the bride, and the beginning of the harvest of the church, the grapes. It will go under pressure, and that's okay. It's not just going to be 50 days, but I believe that we should see the rapture happening of the church at the end, at the Feast of Weeks, new oil, which is a celebration of the completion of the harvest of new wine, or harvest of the grapes, and the beginning of the harvest of new oil. So I believe that should see the rapture happening at this time frame for the church. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there are a couple of scriptures that point to that understanding. Now, it's interesting that there's no feast celebrating the end of the harvest of the oil. So we've got a celebration of the end of the harvest of barley and old wheat. We've got a celebration of the end of the harvest of the new wheat. And we've got a celebration at the end of the harvest of grapes. But what about the celebration at the end of the harvest of new oil? And I believe the reason for that is that the oil is speaking of the Jews, or the tribe of Judah, that has to go through the 7 seals, and then later the 7 trumpets. But we know that there's no end, there's no taking up. They will move into the millennial reign, and I believe that that's the reason why, just like the oil goes, it's long lasting, it continues on, and it's speaking to me about that they will continue on into the millennium, that there is no taking up to the paradise or third heaven, and that's why there's no end of harvest celebration for the new oil. So if that makes sense to you. So that's where. So what I'm trying to show here is that we are clearly still following Yahweh's plan. It's in the feasts. It's always been in the feasts. I put it out a document. Before I just go there, I just wanted to complete this. So I want to talk about the Feast of Weeks a little bit more, because I think that's where we really must be focusing our attention and understanding. So we've got the Friday, a possible group escaping, a possible group being called to a mountain, told to go and tell the others today, prepare yourself today, tomorrow, the third day, and then we've got the escape. And by that time, the attack will have just happened. That's the smaller attack of the two. And then we've got the final attack, which will probably happen here. Now, the question in terms of this is when does the Son of Man come? And I'm of the belief that our 7 days after the escape is still valid. That's 7 days for the wedding. That's 7 days. It's all over the place. I've said over and over again, we cannot discard the 7 days. The 7 days before the 40 days, I believe, is still valid. And that's this time period here. So that's Jesus' wedding week. And this also coincides with that time when Moses was pleading on behalf of the Israelites for their error of worshipping the golden calf. It also coincides with this time here, which is the time when they received the law, they entered into a covenant, and they had a meal. So all of these things, these time periods are all related, and I believe it'll be the wedding week. After the wedding week is when the Son of Man comes. And I believe that somewhere around the 8th or the 9th of September, or the 20th day of the 5th month, or the 21st day of the 5th month, will be when the Son of Man comes, and the beginning of his 40 days and 40 nights, taking us through to so that's, I think there's 10 days here and there's 30 days there. So let's just check that. That's 2, 4, 6, 8. Yeah, it's 10 days there and 30 days there. That's 40 days. And the end of his 40 days will end up just before the attack on the final attack on Israel, which will be on somewhere around the first day of the 7th month or the 18th of October. Now I know that we're looking at trying to understand this equinox thing and how does that, and the turn of the cycle of the sun and all that type of thing, and also then the Queen of the South rising in the judgment. And this is where I believe that nothing is broken in terms of that understanding. We will still, we know that the bridegroom goes out as a strong man, and it's the fact that it's in his 40 days, I believe, is perfectly fine. We know that the rising of the Queen of the South in the judgment is while the Son of Man is there. So the scriptures say that a one greater than Solomon is here. So when we look at the timing of the constellations, I know I'm way over my time. I'm now probably about an hour in terms of this video alone, and I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible, but I do believe it's important to have a look at some of these, and perhaps I'll go into more detail later. But what I really wanted to share with you guys in this video also was a comparison between the start of the year, the effect of the start of the year between the two calendars. This is the Hebrew calendar for this year, and this is that's in the orange, and the green one is what I believe to be the correct calendar. Let's call it the Sun, Moon, and Stars calendar, if you like, where it starts the year at the 24th of April, such that the feast of Passover occurs in Aries, and that the sun is in Aries. So let me just go into detail here. So what I've plotted on this clock is that we've got the constellations going around as we know in the correct order, where the one would be the beginning of the month. So each constellation gets about 30 days in the year, where the sun spends about a month in each constellation as it goes around. Okay. And we know that in the first month we've got the Feast of Passover, we've got the Feast of, let me just go to the bigger version. We've got the Feast of Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks in the first month. We've got the Feast of New Grain in the third month, right in the middle of the third month. We've got the Feast of Weeks at the 9th of the 5th month, so that's the beginning of the 5th month. And then we've got the other feasts, the Feast of New Wine right on the first day of the 7th month. The Feast of Trumpets on the same day, Atonement and Tabernacles all happening in the middle of the 7th month. So that's what I've plotted out on this timepiece, if you want. I've put the months of the Gregorian months in their place, so that you can just get a relationship between the beginning of the year in relation to the Gregorian calendar. So it lines up with the 24th of April, which I believe was the correct start for this year. And we are now coming close to we are here at the beginning, or we're heading towards the middle of August. So we are somewhere here on the clock. And the sun at the moment is in Cancer. So we're heading towards the Feast of Weeks and New Wine, where I believe the scape will be. So this is the one picture. When you plot out the feasts on this picture, that's what it kind of looks like. And in this case, this makes sure that the year starts such that the sun is in Aries for the Feast of Trumpets, a Feast of Passover. Okay, and so each month goes along. This is where Jesus' birthday would be, in the middle of the third month, at the Feast of New Grain. And this is where we know at the Feast of Trumpets, we have come to understand that this is where the conception was. The conception of the Lord Jesus was at the Feast of Trumpets and the Feast of New Wine at the first day of the 7th month. And so I plotted those pictures. So we've got conception, birth, and death. And if you have a look, we're starting to see a picture formed here. We're starting to see a very nice picture formed here, we're seeing here, there's nothing. What is supposed to happen here? If this picture were complete, if this were the escape, it kind of would really start to complete the picture in my view. This symbol here represents the time when I believe the fall of man occurred. Now, it is based on the book of Adam and Eve, where I have done a video of it before, but I've never shared it. I'm not sure if I'm going to share it or not. But if you read the book of Adam and Eve, you can clearly determine that the fall of man occurred on the 14th day of the 10th month. Okay, this is the 10th month. That's the middle of the month. That's when the fall of man occurred. So we've got a situation where this picture is starting to form very nicely. And I believe that this is the picture that we should be looking at. If you take all of these feasts and all of these positions and you plot it on the Hebrew calendar, where they believe that the start of the year was in the 25th or the 26th of March, okay, that's when the sun was when it was more in Pisces, and the Passover would not have occurred when the sun was in Aries on their calendar. So this is when Passover would have occurred, and unleavened bread and feast of first fruits would have occurred outside of the story of Aries. By the way, Aries is, I know we see it as a ram, but in the old days it was seen as a lamb. Okay, originally, ancient times, was seen as a lamb. So the story is starting to get a bit skewed. We've now, if we plot Jesus' birth on this particular calendar, because the third month on their calendar would be here, where it was the 7th of June. You remember we were still looking at the escape of the bride on Jesus' birthday on the 7th of June or thereabouts, and that's where it would have been in terms of the 15th day of the third month. Their third month was there, and you can see how it's just not, the picture doesn't look right, does it? This is where new wine was. I mean, we're now here, and new wine is passed, and that's nothing happened. And then we've got the other feasts occurring here. So when you have a look at this picture, you can see there's something misaligned. In my view, it just does not work. I may spend a bit more time on this in another video and go into more detail about this beginning of the year story. I'm clearly not going to have time to discuss it too much in this particular. So in this instance, I just want to go back to the Hebrew calendar one. There's a scripture that where Joseph was blessing his sons, and he talks about Judah. And I just want to see if I can find that very quickly, because I really believe that Judah is related to wine. There is something about wine in the Judah story. And I think it was, I should have really flagged it. Let me just find it here. Yeah, here we go. Well, this is when Jacob was blessing his sons, okay, and he blesses each of his sons. There's Reuben, there's Simeon, and so on, and here's Judah. Now listen to what he says to Judah. He says, Judah, thou art whom thy brethren shall praise, and thy hand shall be at the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. There's clearly, from the prey of my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall arouse him? The sepulchre shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Binding his fowl unto a vine, and his ascot unto the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk. It's, if you just look at the length of that blessing compared to, okay, there are two long ones, Joseph and Judah. And I'm of the view that this is telling us that the Lion of Judah is related to new wine. That's where the new wine occurs. That's why Judah was why there's so much wine related to the blessing. I believe that's what it's pointing us to. And then we know if this is the scape at the new wine and the 9th of Av, then the Son of Man should arrive when the sun is in the Lion of Judah. And his 40 days will last right up here up to during the Virgo. So this is when the Queen of the South rises. And I'm going to show you in Stellarium that during the Son of Man's 40 days, if Virgo is the Queen of the South, then Queen of South clearly on this calendar rises during this 40 days. The 40 days would be from here somewhere through to the first of this. I showed you on the previous calendar. So to me, this, if you go have a look here, that picture, that can't happen because we are already here. So if the escape happens at the end of August or even on the 21st of August, now we've got the Son of Man's time going right up into the middle of the scales, and judgment, in my view, starts when judgment starts when the Son of Man leaves on the 1st of the 7th month. There's just so many things that are telling me that this story is much more accurate, and the picture is much more clear on this understanding of when the calendar should be, as opposed to this understanding of when the calendar should be. So I just want to go to Stellarium with one last thing, and I'm going to set it to see if I can just quickly, without spending too much time on it, if we take it to our time date now, we are in August the 11th. I'm going to switch off some of these things so that okay, let's just expand this to full size. Okay, so that's maybe a little bit less cluttered. So here we've got Virgo, and this is the date that we're on at the moment. Okay, that's the date that we're on. Now, if we say the escape, if we're expecting the escape to happen at the end of August, somewhere around the 30th, okay, if this is the escape, if that date is correct. I'm not saying it is, but if it is. And if we now, if we play this forward, we're saying that the Son of Man should come around about, I said the 8th, let me just go back to the calendar. We said the Son, somewhere around here, the 8th or the 9th of September. Okay. So if we go September the 8th or the 9th, and we start playing this forward for his 40 days. His 40 days is running now. Okay. So we can see what's happening is through here's the Queen of the South arising. Your horizon is the green line. Okay. Whatever's below the green line is below the horizon. Whatever's above the green line is above the horizon. I think we are looking at it from a Jerusalem perspective. It doesn't really matter, but there's the Queen of the South rising in the judgment, in my view, taking us through to, we said in October, or let's just take it back, we said the 18th of October would be the end. There's the Queen of the South rising. Now that was during she started rising during these 40 days, and then where's the judgment? Okay, let's just go back and have a look. the judgment starts from the 18th of October going forward. So we can run that stellaria. So 18 October running forward. And there's the Queen of the South rising in the judgment. Okay. So that's just my take on that understanding and how it all fits into this particular calendar. Okay, I would have liked to have spent more time on stressing and explaining why I believe the Feast of Weeks, at least all the feasts, and why I believe that God's plan is still in the feasts. It started off with the feasts. The first feast has been fulfilled. His birthday was on the Feast of Weeks. Throughout his scriptures, everything is related to, well, not everything, but so many things are related to harvest, related to seed planting, related to all these principles. The harvest of the field, where we talk about the 10% going to the temple, the harvest belonging to the owner, and then the gleanings. So many pictures of the redemption of man are related to feasts and the harvest that I just cannot put it aside. I cannot ignore that God is trying to bring our attention. I don't have time to go into great detail on this now, but I'll make a separate video on this because I'm really going over the hour now. But I started looking at the detail of the sacrifices and then also the feasts. And by the way, the feasts are his feasts. I just want to make this one point. He says, my offering, my bread for my sacrifice made by fire for a sweet savour, unto me, God said, shall be observed. To offer unto me, he said twice, in their due season. So we are to observe them unto the Lord in his due season. These are not our feasts, these are his feasts, including the Sabbath. It's his Sabbath. Unto me. And when you go look at Zechariah, he says to Zechariah 7, we've read this over and over again. He says, in the 5th and the 7th month, did you fast unto me? Even though they fasted, he said, did you do it even unto me? And I'm telling you, I believe it's because they've been doing it, but they've been doing it in the wrong season. They've made their own time. They haven't been seeking the Lord and to understand his times. And that's why they're being accused of not doing it unto him, unto the Lord Jesus, unto the Father. That is the reason why. And it's all about the timing when they should be doing it. And it's because their calendar has been out by a month for a very long time. I covered that in great detail in my previous video. The Hebrew calendar is out by a month, and it's been like that for a long time, almost 1,000 years or more. So I want to just, the point I wanted to make here also was that it's everything is on a appointed day, so we need to understand his calendar. If we're going to get these feasts right, we have to do it on his timing, not on our own. And we know from Genesis 1:14 that his timing is based on the sun, the moon, and the stars. Any calendar that doesn't have the sun and moon stars in the determining of its days, on the numbering of its days, is wrong. Now, the point I want to make here is look at the attention that God is bringing us to these feasts. There were all these sacrifices. I mean, there was two young bullocks and 1 ram and 7 lambs. And then there was a whole lot of things they had to do on each of these feasts. 2 young bullocks and 1 ram and 7 lambs. And then each one of these feasts, I mean, it's just, there's 1 lamb. That was for the Feast of First Fruits. Then we've got Feast of Weeks. 1 young bullock, one ram, and 7 lambs. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I think there's some really exciting stuff. I'm still trying to get my mind wrapped around all these differences in that. But with all these sacrifices that we were doing, do you think he was trying to attract our attention? Do you think he was trying to point to something really significant, to his feasts? I mean, look at this Feast of Tabernacles. They had to sacrifice 13 young bullocks and 2 rams and 14 lambs. And they had to do that every single day of the Feast of Booths. They did it each day, and then reduced from 13. The next day they would reduce it down to 12, then 11, then 10, then 9 and 8, and then 7 over those 7 days. And so there's a tremendous amount of sacrifice. And you think the Lord takes any joy in all these sacrifices? No. This was about attracting our attention. This was about getting our minds to understand that he regards these feast days as very important. And we need to take cognizance of that. We need to spend a bit more time studying these feasts and understanding what their significance is. Okay. Very last, we know that the scriptures don't cover the actual feast or weeks of new wine and oil, but there's enough to point to this, to show that we've got corn, wine, and oil. I'll just see if I can find one of them. The first fruits of thy corn, thy wine, and thy oil, and the first of the feast of the year. So they were supposed to tithe. There's another one here that's very clear. When then brought all of Judah the tithe of the corn, that's the wheat and the barley, etc., the new wine and the oil into the treasuries. So they did this tithing thing not just for the wheat, not just for one. They did it for new wine and they did it for oil, which to me is clearly pointing to the fact that those other feasts of new wine and new oil were also observed and should be observed, even though there's no detail in the scriptures in our book. So that's just my view, and I don't think that we should be throwing those new wine and new oil out. Even in Revelations it said, do not hurt the oil and the wine. So right throughout his word, there's corn or wheat and wine and oil. All three are pointing to his harvest. And so I'll spend more time on this in another video that I'm not going to get into detail on that right now. There is one last thing that I keep on saying last thing, but I'm really pushing it now. I feel like Abraham now. Just one more thing, just one more. Oh, Lord. My goodness. Let me just, I think I'll close on this one, because this is pretty important. This was something that I discovered recently. With regards to the constellations, in Job 38 verse 32, God says to Job, can thou bring forth the Mazaroth, which is the constellations. Okay, that word is constellations also. It's the Mazaroth in his season. Can thou bring forth the constellations in his season? Or canst thou guide, okay, the important part is this season now. If you search for the word season, you'll find there's about 5 different Hebrew words for the word season. The 2 main ones are the season for Moedi, Moedi, or appointed time. Let me just say it in English. The appointed time, and then there's this one, which is translated in some instances as season, and some instances it's translated as time. Okay, so we've got it is time. It is also related to something that's continual or perpetual. Okay, it comes from this word H5703, and it's something into perpetual, perpetuity. Okay, a sense of eternity is linked to the constellations. And it's very interesting that when you go into Leviticus 26:4, it says, when I give you the rain in due season, and again, it's that same season, it's that same word. There, the rain in due season, and it's not the appointed time season, it's the other season, the season that's related to the constellations. So what I'm saying is that the planting, the weather, is all related to this word, this H6256. And the land shall yield in her increase, and the trees and the field shall yield their fruit. So I'm saying the agricultural seasons are related to the H6256. You can go search this. You'll find over and over again that this word, this season, from an agricultural perspective, whenever it's talking about something agricultural, it's H256, and it's linked to the Mazaroth. I believe that we must use the stars, the Mazaroth, the constellations, for the determining of our planting season. If you go and there's another verse, I don't know if I can remember where it is. Ecclesiastes 3. Ecclesiastes 3. Ecclesiastes 3. To everything is, okay, let me go to, okay. To everything there is a season. Okay, that's a different word, season. Okay, appointed, occasion. There's occasion and a time. there's that word time, that H6256, and to every purpose, for every purpose under the sun. And a time to be born, and a time, so it's a time. There's constellation, the one that's related to constellation. To be born, we all know we're born under a star sign. That's the reason. And a time to die, okay? And a time to plant. There's the word related to planting. So, and a time to pluck up. This is time H6256, to pluck up, to harvest, okay? That which is planted. So, to me, I'm clear in my mind. The time, the season that we need to be looking at, we need to make sure our year lines up with the constellations, with the Mazzaroth. For the same, it also then would then ensure that we comply with Genesis 1:14. Anyway, that was just an interjection on some interesting stuff that I think that clearly points to a calendar that must start in line with the stars, and that we should be ensuring that our year starts when the sun and the moon. So when the sun and the moon are together, such that, and we start the year such that the sun will be in Aries for the first month. That's what I believe is important. I've tried to make a case for that before. I'm just stressing that case now, and I think that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave it at that for this video. I'll spend a bit more time maybe getting another video together on the feasts, and then we'll have a look at all those different sacrifices that were done and see if there's more to it that we need to glean. But as for me, right now, I believe we are still on track for our first visitation on the 28th of August, and perhaps escape on the 30th of August. And I've tried to explain why I believe that. So I hope this has been of some value to you guys. And with that, I'm going to sign out.